Hot damn. Am I live, peoples? Let me know in the chat. Oh, my God. All right, it looks like one person made it over here. I just need a link for this so that I can send people to it. Okay, good. So I'm visible. That's what I'm hearing. Yes. Yes. All right. I just need to get back to my main page so I have this up. All right. Yes, people are here. Again, y'all, my apologies. I really, like I said, there are certain times in my life where I don't like myself. Okay, so let me make sure that this one is muted over here. I can double check it's all here. Okay, good. Okay, so this live stream, again, thank you for all your patience, is going to be discuss or to review what the hell is going on. I mean, really, what the hell is going on? Everyone's talking about Iran. Everyone's getting upset. They're saying it's the Yinon plan and that, you know, the United States is beholden to Israel and that this is all really just to create a greater Israel for them. Yeah, or that it's, you know, Trump is doing this in order to create distractions vis-a-vis his impeachment. There's all kinds of crap like this going on. And so I want to back up for everyone. All right, I've made some notes. They are what they are. The first thing that we need to recognize is that there are a bunch of powers out there in the world who want to take Trump down. I'm not just here to like put a red hat on and talk all night long about MAGA. This is just a fact. Trump, you know, no matter what political direction you're coming from or going towards, it should be apparent to everyone that Trump has basically shaken things up. He's created a situation where all kinds of people who had carefully laid plans have seen them tossed up in the air. Now, you can argue that for some groups, their plans are coming to fruition. Israel is one of these. Things are going to be happening in the Middle East. Israel stands to benefit from it, and it is put at great risk by the changes that are about to go down. But that's just a part of the picture. As I mentioned in a tweet a while before starting this stream when I was still thinking about doing it, a lot of people are talking about what's going on, but I'm not entirely sure that they're viewing everything at the proper scale, whether that's in space or in time. So Trump has caused people any number of problems, and there are all sorts of folks who want to take him down, China being foremost among them, for obvious reasons. If you don't understand why it is that China would like to see Trump go, there's really not fuck all I can do with you in terms of reasoning or talking. So go and check it out, look into it. I think it will be apparent to everyone, no matter where they're coming from, that there are good reasons for China to want to get rid of Trump. There are good reasons for the powers that be in the EU to want to get rid of Trump. There's every reason for the powers that be in Canada to get rid of Trump or want to. And that's not talking about countries like Iran. You know, there are many out there who'd like to see him go away. And we are 1 year out from the election, which means we have arrived at the time of the great tar baby trap. We have arrived at the time where a move is going to be made to try to get Trump to screw up. And I believe that that move began to take shape with the business of surrounding the U.S. Embassy and, you know, causing a fuss outside it. And I don't mean that this is the geopolitical starting point. I just mean that in terms of our current reckoning, you have to look at that as a kind of starting point. Now, it's possible you could back up a bit and say that it has to do with moves to create upheaval in Iraq, you know, in terms of having Shiites go after Shiites, you know, supposedly pro-Iraq Shiites being against, or, you know, some particular Shiite militia being against Iran's continuing meddling in the region. But I think it really all came down to this business with the embassy, because it started to look bad and there was going to be trouble. And I even, you know, talked to people who were saying, yeah, the outside of the compound's been breached, you know, it's looking bad. Now, Trump hasn't really done fuck all in terms of military strikes against anybody. He did that Moab thing to crush a bunch of tunnels and to deal with terrorists in Afghanistan, but it was a lot of bang. Now, I don't know what mileage he got out of it, but you know, it wasn't really a move against anybody that mattered in terms of state actors. Wait a minute. Now I'm seeing that there's something going on with my voice being out of sync. Sorry about that. All right, I can't look at the damn chat or I'm going to get lost with all the kinds of things that I'm trying to express. So, okay, Trump did his thing with his Moab, and he did his thing with striking an air base, you know, after a red line was crossed. And as best we can tell, the Russians and therefore the Syrians were warned in advance of the air attack. Most of the personnel got out, you know, basically some hangars and things got blown up, and you can see scorched marks on the tarmac, and it was quickly rebuilt. So Trump hasn't been doing a whole lot. He's been pushed up to that line. The neocons get happy about it, but ultimately he does something that's just much more of a surface treatment, and he doesn't go far enough. And he has been pretty chill in reacting to a number of provocations from Iran, which, as I will be arguing now, I believe ultimately come from China by way of Iran, and are designed to change public perceptions about Trump and his presidency and move things forward for China. But in order to understand that, you're going to have to take a look at some maps with me. So what I recommend that everybody does, if you're able to do it, you know, it's not going to be important to see my mug. So, you know, be listening, but open up a map so that you can see the world. And I think we're going to be able to walk our way through this so that you'll understand what I'm talking about when I say that this is an attempt to bring Trump down. But it's that's just one move in a much bigger game. Basically, what I'm saying is let's take a look at this as though it's at least possible for us to understand what's going on in the background here, what contextualizes all these events that we're seeing. But let's do it in a way where we consider what's appears to be happening rather than like picking from the buffet of available examples that we're supposed to accept. You know, there's an alt-right view on what's happening here. There's a boomer neocon warhawk kind of view. There's a globalist view. There's, you know, which is very similar to like a European or blue commie view. Let's take a look at it and try and get a better understanding here. And man, I hope that some of the people in my chat are equipped to be mods so that it just doesn't turn into a nightmare, because this is going to be some triggering shit for a lot of people who have a serious investment in their own particular worldview. Okay, well, we'll see. If some of my peeps are in the house that I know and have given mod privileges before, please make yourself known and I'll activate it. Yeah, okay, I'll give John Ski a mod. How do I do this? Come here, Mr. Ski. Is that Ski? Hope so. We'll find out. All right, we got one. Hey, and Zed Dez is in the house. Awesome. Thank you, guys. Okay, so yeah, let's not pick from the buffet of available options. Let's start out with like a geostrategic background, right? This is my beat up copy. I recommend this to everyone. Tim turned me on to this. I have 2 of them now. You can buy them for cheap online. This is very dated. It's maybe from the late 80s, early 90s. But if you want to get into this kind of shit, a background on it would be very useful. So I'm just going to tap this very, very quickly. There's going to be a lot going on here. I don't even know how long this thing is going to go tonight because I'm just going to say it. The problem is that it's going to be so mixed up with me doing the live stream fumbling that we'll see how many people are willing to bear with this process. Doubtless it's not going to be everyone. All right, I thought I had this section chosen. Those are world theories from Kinder. There we are. Okay, so we have the world according to Mackinder from 1904. It posits that there is a heartland or central zone in Eurasia. Then there's an interior marginal ring, which is kind of like Europe and India and China. And then there's a ring of islands or outer continents. So this is 1904 when Europeans were at the heart of everything, right? This is one way to see the world. Then you have the world according to Mackinder, updated as of 1943. And you've got a heartland or central zone. And now we've got these things called sea powers, which are basically the Europeans and Britain and the United States. So those are considered the 2 centers of gravity. That would be what had been the Russian Empire versus the Western European powers and then their colonial possessions. Then we've got Spikeman and the importance of Rimland. This is another model that people have used. I guess you can't see that very clearly. I'm sorry, guys, I have a delay. And then there's Haushofer, who was big with the National Socialists and the people from Germany in the middle of the 20th century. He had accepted many of the previous things, but he went with a north-south combination where you had, what he called Eurafrica. And it's kind of funny that you hear the EU people now talking about, Europe being tied directly to Africa. Not as though some of those people, those blue commies, have been reading Haushofer. Okay, and then we've got this sketch of geopolitics in the 1980s where we see this idea of a sea power, land power or heartland, then maritime ring of or rimland, and then they've got this ring of underdevelopment and poverty. Then finally, they kind of throw in what they call this developed southern ring, which incorporates South Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, this was, as of the 1980s, how people were looking at all of this. Let me back it up so you can see a little better here. Again, I've got a delay, so my apologies. Man, I should really trim my fingernails too. I'm a dirtbag tonight. Okay. So you have this idea that there are different strategic interests and these different countries around the world. Now, we think of Israel as a player. We think of, the United States as a player, Russia. We increasingly, since the development of these things, we call the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and they added some other ones in. We have this idea that there are these up and coming economies, they're beginning to develop blue water navies. Some of them are getting involved in space programs and all the rest. So we've got this entire world that we have to deal with. And a lot of nationalists like to say, oh no, what we need to do is just back up and be quiet and get out of the world's business because it will all sort itself out. Some of this will be covered in a discussion that I had with Tim, where we just sort of look at this idea of American isolationism. That'll be going up in the next couple of days. But, there's this idea of backing out of this great game. And a number of people who, I don't want to call shills, and I don't want to assume that in bad faith, because, I've had the same thing aimed at me, but a number of people just seem to assert that what we really need to do is get out of Iran because it's just a bloody war for Israel. They assert that we have no business meddling in the affairs of these sovereign nations. And in theory, I'm entirely willing to agree with all of that. It sounds great. It sounds wonderful. If only we lived in a world where that was the case, where if we backed off, everything would just be fine and dandy. Now, I realize in saying that it sounds as though I'm just taking a neocon position, which is, America's got too important a role to play in the world. And, we've got to be involved in all these things or everything would fall apart, which is essentially a kind of paternalistic policeman approach. And I'm not for that. I've been against it for quite some time. And I do think we need to back off from different areas of the world. But in order to do that, we're going to have some sort of balance of power established beforehand. You leave a power vacuum and you get a temporary autonomous zone, which is another way to say a territorially contested zone. You run into all sorts of problems. So let's say, for example, that we wanted to pull out of the Middle East. Well, you'd have to wonder why we're there in the first place. And everyone will say, oh, we're just there for blood wars for Israel, blood wars for Israel. That's not why we went there in the 70s. Yes, we were stationed in Lebanon to act as a buffer, and our people died as a result in the mess, but we weren't there for Israel. I would argue that the reason we supported Israel being there in the first place is to be a thorn in the side of that entire region. As Tim has talked about it, it keeps it from congealing. It's a constant irritant for them. And so that keeps them online as a major world power while we pull energy from them, which was the goal when we were doing what we were doing in the 1970s. We have all our naval power projected there. We have all those bases there, not just for Israel, but because it used to be the energy hub. But now things have changed. In the 70s, there was a thing where Italy was going to start having its own refineries. And Lebanon was a beautiful banking center. And all that got smashed. Everything got sort of kept in a mess. You had Iraq and Iran fighting. You had Shia-Sunni divides. At that point, Saudi Arabia was just trying to rise up to a level to where it could, diversify its economy at all. All sorts of things were going on in the region. At the time, Egypt was the major center of power. And after peace with Egypt was brokered, Israel got to chill out a little bit, and Nasser got taken off the map. So the whole process of forming national socialist army guaranteed governments in the region on the Ataturk model got sort of taken back a peg. And the whole sort of region developed very, very slowly, with the exception of Israel, which did quite well. In retrospect, it looks like anyway, they've been marching forward and developing their economy, getting into high tech, all kinds of things, getting large amounts of money from the US. But the real reason that we were there was for energy, and that's why the rest of the world has been there. You think Russia has a base in Latakia because, they're worried that Israel is going to take everything over? No, they wanted to have a chip or a pebble on the board in that location in order to be able to effect these things. And then you get into all the games of how the energy in the region gets out, which is why you see the struggling over the Straits of Hormuz, the investment in the United Arab Emirates to get other types of influence into the region, and then how that splits, with Qatar sort of in one camp, Bahrain being divided because it's got such a large legacy Persian population there. You see Saudi Arabia playing games where sometimes it works with Israel, sometimes it doesn't. Now you see Egypt, staying quiet in the region. There's a whole lot going on there. I'm sorry, I'm winding down too many paths. The point is that we have been in the Middle East because of energy, and that's why the other players have been there. But the entire system has changed now because Russia is now online with its pipelines. It's successfully selling to Europe. Europe is playing a game where sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't, in terms of the leverage that causes. By that I mean that Germany is playing ball with the pipelines that are being put in, that Trump is pissed off about, but some of the Eastern European countries are more concerned. Like Poland would be more concerned. Hungary would be probably less concerned. But Europe doesn't want to get all of its energy from Russia. So where else can it get it from? From the North Sea, Norway, right? There's some. And for a while, there was Middle Eastern oil, for example, North African oil from Libya. But now that whole thing has been, shaken up and taken offline more or less. So the United States and Russia are now providing energy. And countries like Venezuela. Gee, I wonder why Venezuela is having so much trouble right now. Couldn't be related to all of this, could it? We have to back up and see the big board. So out of these players, you have energy consumers and energy producers. The important ones to look at are great powers that are both energy producers and energy consumers. And out of the three, which I'm naming Russia, the United States, and China, or let's call it four, just for purposes of argument. Let's throw in the EU as though they matter. Okay, you've got Russia, the EU, China, and the United States. Russia and the United States are both energy producers and energy consumers, and they're now both in a position where they can produce as much energy as they need and then sell more. So where does that leave the rest of these folks? Well, China is a huge sucking hole for energy. Europe is a huge sucking hole for energy, and neither of them are producing it. So where is it important that they get their energy from? Well, there's the Middle East. They can go with the Saudis, right? They can buy from Iran. They used to be able to buy from Libya. But now there are a number of natural gas finds that have happened in the Eastern Mediterranean. And if you actually look into it a little bit and pull up some maps, it's going to make you go, because it's fucking everywhere. Well, then you have to back up to look at what China's been trying to do. China is a major, major consumer of energy. And if any of you do your homework and go look at what they need versus what they can produce themselves, which is almost nothing, and how much they have to import, and then if you take a look at their reserves, which is horrible, they had barely even begun to try to build reserve capacity. They're fucked. They are royally fucked. There's only so much you can do with really shitty quality brown coal, and it has its effects upon the atmosphere, as all the people who live in those Chinese cities are discovering. China is screwed. So we've looked at the countries, the major powers, and I threw in the EU just to be polite, right? Look at the major powers and whether or not they're energy producers and energy consumers. Let's take it a second step. Let's look at these old theories that I just threw up there, things like Mackinder and the Heartland and Rimlands and sea powers and the various developments of those ideas. How many of these powers are land and sea powers? Well, let's see here. Russia isn't really a sea power. They've got a great icebreaker fleet that they've been working on, and they could field a real navy if they get some warm water ports. But at present, they've got got excellent submarines, but they're not doing so well with aircraft carriers. I think they just had some problems recently with the one they have, or the one of two that they have. I can't remember what kind of situation they're in. But they're a land power, and they're starved of population, and they have vast territory. Mainly a land power, nothing really going on with the sea power. All right, well, let's take a look at the United States. Land and sea power, preeminent, energy producer and consumer. Looking pretty good for the US. EU, Navy, sort of, except it's been sort of crippled, and to whatever extent it continues to operate, it's within the NATO framework. They were wanting to change that, but they don't produce energy, they consume it. There's something of a land power, but not much of one. Something of a sea power, but not much of one. So who's the new kid on the block? Well, that's China. And China is a land power with a massive land army, massive investment in technology and stuff, leaving aside all Tim's remarks about them essentially being a paper tiger, which appears to be true. But they're trying not to be a paper tiger. This, country that has been sort of like a hermit for the entire 5,000 years of its history, with brief bursts of land conquest to Central Asia and brief attempts at it with Japan and the Koreas and the South Chinese. Essentially, they kind of always pull back into their shell, and yet this dude has appeared who's going to be president for life. They've entirely upended their sort of cultural position of just trying to unite all under heaven within China itself. They're going for an aggressively globalist quasi-communist Maoist program, and they're a major land power, and they're making of themselves, or attempting to make of themselves, a major sea power. And yet they have massive energy consumption, and they have no sources of their own, really. So they're trying to be a sea power to keep one route open, and they're dealing with things like the South China Sea, and they want to get to all these other places to get natural resources because they need to produce, because they like to sell their products cheap to the rest of the world, but they need raw materials in order to do that, and they need to keep their shipping lanes open to sell it, and more importantly, they need energy. So they're trying to get it through seaborne stuff, but the problem is that it's going to be quite some time before their navy can come anywhere near ours, and Trump has invested a massive amount in our already massive military infrastructure. And if the Europeans come online with their navies, in aggregate, we will be able to police the seas. Just no doubt about it. For the foreseeable future, I mean, yeah, you can play games with hypersonic missiles and maybe change the balance of power a little bit. But at the end of the day, as the saying goes, our naval power is unparalleled. So China's trying to do it by sea, but it recognizes their limits. So it's trying to do it by land too. And this is where it gets interesting, because who's the traditional heartland power? China was supposed to be a rimland power. The traditional heartland power is Russia. And they got plenty of energy, and they consume it themselves. Their ability to produce high tech is better than anybody else except the West Europeans and the Anglosphere diaspora. And yet China's trying to become a land power. And the vacuum of space that Russia has can have Chinese populations flow over to it, easily. And they've had problems in their borderlands, so I have been told. By the way, all of this is stuff that Tim sort of walked me through over a period of years, and many of the viewers of the channel should know this by now, but I feel like nobody's come in and just sort of said it as a central picture. And so I'm watching all this stuff go on, and I'm wondering why people weren't paying better attention to the things that were discussed on our channel all this time. So I bring up China and Russia and their position as rivals, as heartland powers in Eurasia, because it matters. It's a slow struggle, so slow that maybe the naked eye doesn't see it, but China and Russia are locked in a life and death struggle. One of them has a small population and vast territory and vast natural resources, and right next to them is one that has the world's largest population. It's almost as like those people could just flow over into those areas easily. The only thing stopping that from happening at the moment is the balance of these other powers. So Russia knows China is a threat. I bring this up because everybody's talking about Iran is being supported by Russia and China. No, it's not. I mean, yes, it is, but no, it's not. Both of them are attempting to keep their chips in play on the little board position of China. Of Iran. But China needs Iran much more than Russia does. If there's any doubt about that, let's just remember that the EU has been wanting to buy energy and has been buying energy from Iran for quite some time. And they're buying it from Russia, but they don't really like it that much. So they'd like to get it from somewhere else. So guess what? Iran is a competitor for Russia in terms of energy sales to China, to Japan, to Europe, to everywhere. They don't mind if Iran goes offline for a while. Russia does not give a shit. They're going to support Iran only to the extent that it continues to suit them. And it looks like some deals have been cut that are going to give Russia a seat at the table that's opening up in terms of the gas fields off the coasts of Cyprus, Lebanon, and Israel, not to mention much of the Eastern Mediterranean seafloor of North Africa. So, and bear in mind that these nations, they can buy in to these deals without having to take over the territory. They can simply be told, yes, Russian energy companies will be allowed to buy in to this very healthy investment opportunity off coast of Lebanon. You know, there are many ways that this can happen. So we've got the view of the different powers. We've got the view of their energy needs. We know that China is currently in crisis, and they're a global communist power, explicitly so. So everybody talk about communists. There are no communists. Fucking China is a communist regime. They have a Chinese Communist Party that rules their country. And they've been exporting all kinds of shit around the world to destabilize areas that they want to gain influence in. And for quite some time, the US was backed off with it. And I'm going to get there to this business with Soleimani and Iran and all of this. But I have to lay the background because people are not looking at this on a large enough scale. China has been trying to extend its influence to get natural resources and to get energy. And it appears that during the Obama years, they cut a deal with the blue commies. Actually, they cut a deal a little earlier than that, but the U.S. didn't like it. There was something that those of you who pay closer attention to financial markets and the rest will probably remember. There was a point at which the euro just completely crashed. I remember it because I had happily insisted that I be paid in euros, and the guys held off on paying me for my project. It was crazy. I went and looked at, the performance of the euro, and like right at the nadir, the lowest point is when they finally got off their asses and paid me what they had been remiss in paying me for many months, waiting for this moment to come. So I remember the euro got smashed. I believe it was in 2010. And it just was absolutely awful. And prior to that, there had been an attempt to float a petro-euro. And it was going to be done in cooperation with Iran as a major source of energy. And I think China was quite a bit behind that, and the Europeans got behind it too. Anyway, that was a first phase, but then Obama comes in, and it looks like some kind of deal got cut. Oh, I got to back up. Those of you who watch the channel know that part of what, and I missed this whole thing because I talked about how China was going by sea to do this, but it's doing it by land. I talked about how it's in competition with Russia for control of the heartland, but I didn't talk about its energy needs over land. It's trying to form one belt, one road. And that one belt, one road goes from Xinjiang, China, and in theory, it will cross Afghanistan, and therefrom will connect with Iran. And then from Iran, it's got to get to the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, the problem is Russia didn't want that to happen. So Russia got into Afghanistan, and Russia was also trying to get down to a warm water port itself, very likely, something like, with now Pakistan, that would have been on the map, but the U.S. blocked them. U.S. has been blocking them. Russia wanted to come through, U.S. blocked them in Afghanistan. And China wants to come through, U.S. blocked them in Afghanistan, keep them from getting to Iran, and keep Iran from getting out the other side through Iraq and Syria and the rest. So everybody's like, oh, it's encircling Iran. Well, yes, it's encircling Iran, but you have to back the scale up. It's encircling Iran as a secondary gimme, as a lanyap. The real thing is to isolate that stone on the board that would be part of the chain of stones leading from Western China to the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, I think what happened, my guess is that at some point the Europeans came along and they said, man, you know what? There's this thing Iran's been trying to do with Chinese support, and that is to reach the sea, because they've been fooling around with Hezbollah in Lebanon forever. They can screw with Israel about it and make it seem unsafe for people to push this development through Israel, keep Iran funky, keep things with Lebanon funky, keep that southern part, you know, unstable. And the Russians probably helped them in it because they're further north with Latakia, and they've got a place where they want this stuff to come out on the Eastern Mediterranean. But China doesn't want to do that because that'll give Russian control to the tap at that end of the pipeline coming out at the Eastern Mediterranean, or I should say that end of the route that travels both ways. So there's got to be some way to pierce through. I think what happened is the EU worked something out with Iran and Obama, and they said, we'll get a deal with Iran. We'll no longer fuss with them about their nuclear stuff. And basically we'll back out of Iraq, which is what Obama did. And the Shiite militias replace the power structures in Iraq, which extends Iran's influence. And then Iran and Soleimani and Hezbollah and Quds Force, you know, special operators and the rest moved into Syria to try to punch all the way through. Now everybody will be going, oh, Shiites, they're all together. No, they're not. Syria is Alawite. Now, they can be tolerated and be allies of convenience with Iran, but that doesn't mean that they both, like, you know, get their chow served in the same cafeteria. They don't. And so, and in any case, Syria was a client state of Russia with the aforementioned naval base in Latakia. So Iran wasn't working with Syria. Basically, Obama, I think, it's all speculation, came along and pumped a whole bunch of money along with the EU, Germany in particular, and probably France. And they came in and they said, let's just blow Syria up. And Israel said, all right, we'll watch from the sidelines. Meanwhile, Iran said, yeah, we'll push through too. But it was kind of a war over who would be able to claim the lion's share of what passed through the region. And I think to some extent that Obama was working together with Hezbollah and the rest of them. That's where we talk about they helped us defeat ISIS. We just used ISIS to destabilize Syria, and then we decided we were going to turn it into a rump state and push straight through to the sea, which would have benefited the blue commies working together with Obama and Trudeau types and the Chinese and Iran. But Russia said no. They said because they're in a life and death struggle with China, and if China gets this overland route, and if they've got the part worked out from Iran to the Eastern Mediterranean, then all that remains is to push the part through with Afghanistan. And they can then run under Russia's little underbelly there and steal a march on them in terms of becoming the major players in Asia. I realize this is horribly disconnected, but I did not have time to write this out as a skeleton. So I'm going to be jumping around, you know, trying to light fires in the darkness to illuminate this whole. Again, my apologies for those of you who might not be able to follow the admittedly scattered presentation. So it looks like Russia worked something out with Turkey that would allow a pipeline to come through, possibly Iran, we'll see, but it could also come down north through the Caucasus. It could come from Azerbaijan. I mean, it could come through, you know, from Russia down through the Trans-Caspian or Caucasus or Armenia area through some of the Kurdistans, and then it would hit that Syrian plain just south of the rough country of Turkey and basically just make a beeline westward to the Levantine coast. And then you start looking, wow, Syria and Turkey have had struggle for quite some time over the Sanjak of Alexandretta, and Ataturk demanded that he get it. And the Turks invaded northern Cyprus in 74 when all the shit was changing on the game board there in the Middle East. So it's almost like Turkey's known about this for quite some time. And gee, when you think about it, if a pipeline went from, let's just say, somewhere in Russian control, if things don't get worked out with Iran, into what we're calling nascent Kurdistan in Iraq, and then it crosses along Turkey's southern underbelly, and basically they just punch a tunnel through the Sanjak of Alexandretta, and they come out and they're right set to have an entire complex with northern Cyprus. So that's one route that was in question. And I think Turkey and Russia have worked something out to make that happen. and they've probably done it with Trump's blessing, although, everybody's going to have to get their piece from it. But what you have going on is now China and Iran saying, well, fuck, we've just been cut out. And so they're going to try now, since they couldn't do it the other route, to connect to Lebanon. They've tried to connect to Lebanon before during the Syrian conflict. So what happens is Iran sort of destabilizes stuff in Iraq. Maybe the U.S. started it first. Probably did, in terms of fomenting, people getting in the street saying we're Shiites, but we don't want the Iranian government anymore. Iran comes in and sends in Qasem Soleimani and says, "Man, we're gonna have to make stuff rough for these people." And Qasem Soleimani is exactly the person to do it. And so he goes into Iraq. And he's also traveling around. Now, there are two different stories that are basically current about where he was coming from before he went through or up into Baghdad. And the two options are that he was either in Syria or in Lebanon. I tend to think he was actually in Lebanon because, as we just discussed in a recent clip, Tim and I, Carlos Rosen just went to Lebanon, escaping his house arrest in Japan. You'll have to look at the previous clip because I can't go into all of it now, but he looks like he's a political figure who's been tapped to remake that region. And it looks like major players in Europe and elsewhere were trying to shut him down, and yet he escaped in a stand-up bass case that the musicians at his private party brought. And somehow he just decides to fly to Lebanon right at a time when Lebanon is about to explode. Now, I've been talking about this for several days. Everyone's like, why is he talking about Lebanon? He doesn't know anything. It's the Yinon plan. It's all blood and treasure for Israel. Well, Israel, yes, but for Israel among several others. So he flies into Lebanon. Meanwhile, we just hear that Nasrallah has done this big speech about how they're going to go after U.S. military targets, but not the citizens of the country, because that would be a terrible thing. That would be non-combatants, because they're so civilized. You can hear China behind every bit of it. China is the one modulating Iran's posture in their own fear, and Iran, in turn, together with China, are modulating the posture of Hezbollah in Lebanon. This whole situation has changed. The whole situation has changed. Lebanon is now being cut off from Iran. And now it's got to be sorted, because if you look at those maps of natural gas, it's just insane. It's insane. The entire Eastern Mediterranean is fully set. And guess what happens if all of that comes online? Iran's not selling to Europe anymore. And guess what happens to all those EU companies that worked with Obama to broker all the energy deals about how everything was going to happen? They just got fucked out of their peaches. Those people are literally going to have to go back and be like, I guess we're the least, last, lost, and loneliest. We put our money on Iran and China, and now we're fucked. And guess who they're going to have to buy from now? A consortium of international companies working out of the developing Levantine coastal regions that includes Cyprus. Meanwhile, Tim was talking about how the Royal Navy might get involved. Well, they were involved before at the Straits of Hormuz, but they have continued to support that position. They've got a naval base in Akrotiri in Cyprus, if I'm not mistaken, that's the location. And they are not turning loose of the Pillars of Hercules of Gibraltar, as so much pressure had been on them previously to do. So you have to take a look at this entire picture to understand what's going on with Iraq. This isn't. I talked to a right-wing Israeli guy one time, and I even mentioned the thing about the idea of a greater Israel, and he just looked at me and said, "We're patient, man." And they don't need to take the physical territory to do what they want. They can exercise economic control in other countries without having to take it over or change the map. It's just so strange to me to hear all the people who foam at the mouth about Israel. And I'm not saying Israel doesn't do fucked up things. Everybody does, and they do certainly. But the same people who will tell you about how they subvert countries and they operate as an elite class in the media and the banking sector to manipulate events without having to physically take over the territory, these same people will go on and on about the fucking Yinon plan, about how greater Israel and they'll dominate everything. They don't have to do it with territory. It's a different model, just like we don't have to do it with physical control of territory. As long as you deal with the energy lines and the old-fashioned choke points, like the Suez Canal or the Bosphorus or the Straits of Gibraltar or the Bering Strait. So the issue here is that it's a much bigger war going on. And well, here's the other point I wanted to cover. I've got my shitty notes here. We're at war. Everyone's like, what's going to happen if we go to war? Oh my God, it'll be terrible if we go to war. Fucking wake up and smell the coffee. We are currently at war. It just happens to be non-kinetic in most areas. And we have been solidly at war for the soul of the West, as well as many other, side effects, a secondary prizes of a secondary order. We've been at war for these things for quite some time. It certainly, in an exaggerated sense, since Trump took office, and all of the best laid plans of mice and blue and red commies had come to naught with Trump's swearing in. So I talked about the fact that they're trying to fuck Trump. There's 1 year out, right? I'm going to review some of these things, tap a few more points, and then I'm going to take questions. But we've got this situation where it's time to fuck Trump. It's time to make him look bad. The election's coming up. They haven't gotten fuck all with impeachment. All the Chinese attempts to smear him, and the Chinese just don't understand how someone like this in public life could continue to hold office. Tim pointed this out. He's very right. They have the idea of saving face, and they just do not understand a Trump. And you would think after the business of, grab him by the pussy, and all the things that Trump had to deal with then when he was going into his business of the debates at the time prior to the election, you'd think that since then, some of these sharp-penciled Confucian or Moist or Taoist or a proper communist or whatever the fuck they are with the sharp pencils would have thought this through and said, our techniques aren't working. Well, they're not. Iran is howling and saying, EU's got to do more to enforce these deals. But you know what? The EU's fucked. They're fucked. That's another aspect of this. Brexit is going to go through. Russia has been gotten on board somehow. I don't know any of the details, of course. I just have to guess. And the US is boxing them in. So Europe is surrounded. And they're about to be flooded with more refugees. Right about the time that Brexit is going to cause them an enormous financial hit. At which point I expect they will finally develop a proper gag reflex. And we're going to see them barf shit up southwards down across the Mediterranean. And I think at that point, the people who do geostrategic thinking in Europe, such as they are, by this I only mock those currently in office or in having roles in their bureaucratic hive, they will finally recognize that the actual southern border of Europe is North Africa. As the Romans knew, there's a reason they called the Mediterranean Mare Nostrum, and Europe is going to push south, but only after they've had this emetic, this black and brown emetic poured down their throats. So yes, they've got this business of getting Trump into trouble. Iran has been howling and saying, EU, help us. EU can't do shit about it. Impeachment's not doing anything. So their best bet is try to drag him into war because they know that the people who back Trump are very much against pointless foreign wars. And they're banking on this. And this is the point at which you have to recognize how much of right-wing propaganda is infiltrated by Chinese and Iranians. Yes, there are Israelis in there. Yes, there are Fed posters in there. There are shit cans of Russians. There are probably smaller things that you see out of countries like Canada or the UK. But there, huge amounts of money has been dumped by Iran and China into shitting all over Israel. Now, Israel does all kinds of things that make people dislike them anyway. But the bottom line is somebody here has got to take a moment and take a deep breath and recognize, yeah, there are people who are pissed off at Israel. And some of them arguably have good reasons. And yes, there is a genuine irritation on the part of lots of sensible people with Israel and some of their policies. But from my perspective, the vast majority, granted that those people are there, the vast majority, I think, of what you see online that's all fucking, unplanned Israel, the fuckers, man, it's all the Jews. There's a lot of Chinese and Iranian money in that. I realize this will be unpopular, and I'm not saying that all the people who say that stuff are shills for China or Iran. I just think that, I talked about this a little bit when I was talking with Millennial Woes. My original idea had been to talk about the fish garth and how fish traps work in a river. And it's all about funneling the fish one way and setting up a wickerwork, a weir, a fish weir, fish wire, weir, however the fuck you pronounce that. Morgoth could tell me, I bet, and it would sound excellent in his accent. But it's not just the objects that are designed to funnel the fish in a particular direction. You have to have the current. And the current that we have to take into account in this world of social media is people saying, you're a cuck, or you're a shill for Israel. You have to see it. At least be aware that for all the other shilling that goes on, because it goes in other directions, it certainly goes in pro-Israel directions, it goes pro-EU directions, it goes pro-commie directions. There are all sorts, but at least recognize, people, that there is an actual push from groups that are historically against Israel, like Iran, or ones that need to take out Israel in the Eastern Mediterranean in order to have their own energy plans reach fruition. Look at China. It's a win-win for them. If China can successfully foment anti-Semitism and a basic sort of anti-Israel position in the West, then it's a win-win. Israel's standing and position is degraded with the people who are at least ostensibly their historical allies. Take that how you will. But further still, it's the old commie Holocaust thing, or I'm sorry, Holocaust, or Holocaust denial. It's the whole Holocaust picture. By getting the right wing to go crazy after Israel again, it falls into all of the stereotypical patterns that are associated with the evil white people and their Nazis, and they want to kill Jews. It suits them beautifully. If they can foment an anti-Israel reaction, they degrade Israel's position, and at the same time degrade the position of the West morally in terms of how it will be seen. I'm not taking a position here. I'm just telling you that it's a win-win. And you don't have to buy it. Absolutely not. Think for yourself. But at least take a look at the picture and think, is there anyone else who might benefit from pushing an anti-Israel reaction other than, say, Iran? Would it suit China? I think it would. And we know that commies have for quite some time been very, very happy to use guilt related to the Jews and the Holocaust as a lever to basically make whole populations, whole majorities freeze up and shut their fucking mouths, and to get them to not say anything. I mean, so at least like give this some broader thought. Okay, let me look at my notes here. As I said, I'll take questions here. So I covered this business about China's role, I think, at least in part. I'm not saying it's solely this. I'm not saying it's artificial entirely. But some part of the current push for what's called anti-Semitism is being driven by Iran, certainly, and most likely by China working together with them. Okay, I've already covered the point about we are at war, though it's currently non-kinetic, with Iran and China, and frankly, with the EU. Okay. Now, I talked about with each successive president, we see people go in and do something with Middle East policy. You know, you have the first Iraq war, you have the second Iraq war. You know, each president's got to do something to change things, and each one of these have been like putting pebbles on the board to affect this area. But the importance of this area has been ensured for quite some time, based on the fact that everybody needs energy from there. But now nobody does, except Europe and China. They're the ones whose status and position will depend upon events there. And if this gets set up right, then essentially the US will be able to pull out, because China and the EU will have it in their best interest to maintain stability there so they can continue to get their energy from the region. And they'll be overseen by things like the British Navy and the Russian Navy at Latakia, you know, and in Cyprus, you know, for the former. So what's about to happen is those countries are going to have to basically, you know, make sure that those things get kept calm. It's no longer going to be the US's job to do so. It'll be Israel and probably the Royal Navy, as Tim pointed out, and the EU putting their economic pressure to bear on making these things stay stable. And China will have it in its own best interest not to fuck with this system anymore, because they'll be buying from there, as well as from Russia and probably from the United States as well, because their energy needs are so high. It's just going to be so amusing to watch China be the one that has to worry about whether or not the price of oil goes up, you know, from $30 to $50 a barrel, and therefore is dragged, you know, balls first into whatever quagmire anyone wants them to, because they have to address that issue. Meanwhile, countries like Russia and the United States are just going to be able to sit there and be like, you want some more? Okay. We've got it. We produce our own. So that's the point about each one of those successive presidents going in and changing Middle East policy. The last one you saw was with, I mentioned the business of the Iraq wars. You saw it with Obama, a reset with the Muslim world. And then they, go in and they intentionally destabilize Syria and the rest. Arab Spring had the United States and the EU all over it, Israel as well. But I tend to think that they kind of, they kept back, I think, and let the United States and Obama and the blue commies and the EU and the rest wear it. They've basically stayed out of it. So I think they've, or I should say, they've kept their manipulations in this regard sub rosa. So they're not going to have to wear it. The EU and the Obama, those people, it's going to be their legacy. Okay, and then finally Trump comes in with a new reset. And the reason I brought up each one of these different presidents with each one of their incoming administrations going there is to point out this is not just about Israel. This is about the global energy commons. Now, what's happening is the U.S. has its own energy that it can produce regionally with Venezuela and things like that, and developments in Brazil. South America is going to have it. There's plenty of energy resources in Canada. Russia's got it. We're talking about the ones who are going to be kept on the dole, and that's the EU and China. And so they're going to have to go to the global energy commons, which is not as important for us anymore, but it's very, very important for China. And it's very, very important for peripheral countries like Iran, because they want to continue to sell from that commons, and currently they're being cut out. So that brings us to another point, which is the whole business about Trump's just starting another war. Now, I don't know what's going to happen, but let's at least assume one thing. Let's at least assume that it is possible that you can be for pulling out and a more withdrawn nationalist position. But that is not to say that you're just going to simply pull everything out instantly and let a power vacuum ensue. Let's at least imagine that it is possible that if you truly did want to pull out of the Middle East, you would have to arrange some sort of positioning of the relative powers in the region that would amount to a détente or a stalemate, so that there's not immediately a power vacuum and everybody has an interest in keeping it stable. Now, if China's ambitions are thwarted here and Russia can be brought in, China, as I said, as well as the EU, will see it as in their own best interests to maintain stability in that region, and the energy will already be flowing. And Saudi Arabia will be pushed into a second rung along with Iran, and places like Saudi Arabia and Iran will probably fall within the orbit of countries, increasingly of countries like China, whereas the major technological development will happen on the Levantine coast and be associated with the clean natural gas being sold from Cyprus, Lebanon, and Israel to the EU. All right, what else here? Now we've got the business of Turkey and Libya. I was going to talk about this because Tim and I have been talking about it, and it's starting to take shape as a better image for me. But we don't have a bunch of time for that. Let me just say that what I talked about earlier about the natural southern border of the European Union being North Africa, the whole idea of Mare Nostrum, that's about to come into play. And what Turkey is trying to do is to ensure itself some sort of seat at the negotiating table as regards North Africa. I also think that there is something going on with parts of the EU being peeled off. The EU's fucked. They are rats on a sinking ship, and they know it, at least their current leadership. There is a strong possibility that the EU will be reformed in some fashion, such as people like Orban are talking about, where they can keep the cooperation but maintain the national interests. But the current leadership there knows they're fucked. When Brexit goes through, and you've got all kinds of risks of economic collapse in many of these countries, it's a mess. And I believe that they are going to need more migrants in order to form a gag reflex response. And so Libya needs to remain open, because it's really weird if you look at it. You got the government of national unity in the West, and they are very weak militarily, and they don't even really control the majority of the energy reserves. That's leaving aside the massive untapped gas fields off the coast. I'm just talking about the existing energy infrastructure. And yet they're backed by the EU. Weird. And then you get over to Haftar's side, which is in the east, and they've got the majority of the military capabilities, such as it is. And they have They have the majority of the energy infrastructure, and they are supported, at least officially, by France. Whereas over on the other side, you got the UN, the EU, and Italy. So UN, EU, and Italy, and Turkey now are supporting the government of national unity, which is weak and just being propped up. But in the West, you've got Haftar, and they're being supported by Russian mercenaries and by France and by the United States, if we are going to pay any attention to the actual reality, because Haftar's family, much of it still lives in Northern Virginia, and he's been a CIA asset forever. I mean, you can read about it on fucking Wikipedia. So it looks like Trump, Russia, and France have now come together to push from the Haftar side, whereas the EU and Turkey and the rest are trying to keep the whole thing of migrants flowing. And in the end, that's probably going to serve the interests of nationalists more than it will of the globalists, but we'll have to see how that turns out. Anyway, so Erdogan is playing some game where he's got control of the tap of migrants flooding into Europe from the east through Turkey and Macedonia and the Balkans and the rest. But apparently he's trying to get a seat at the table controlling the tap going north through Libya. And of course, the Chinese are doing their African development and pushing those populations north. But everyone's like, it's the Yinon plan. It's the Yinon plan. Yes, Israel is a player, but there are other players on the board too. Some of them more important, at least in terms of what we're already talking about. Okay, so let's see here. I've covered this. China Sea and land power. Oh, the last thing I wanted to say, why is France? Why is France with that little dirtbag Macron? Why is France apparently backing Haftar, who is not officially, but who is implicitly backed by the US and Russia, even to the tune of Russian mercenaries? Why would France be doing that right now when the EU and the European Union are dealing with things over on the other side of Libya? Could it be that when shit goes down in Lebanon, you're going to have a massive repatriation of French-speaking Lebanese Christians and all of those existing French interests? Could that be how you'd get them on board for this? Golly, I don't know. One wonders. So in order to understand what's happening, you have to see the whole map. And as Tim pointed out, Soleimani was important for being a rabble-rouser in Iraq, but especially in Lebanon. And it looks like the chances are high that he was coming from Lebanon when he arrived in Baghdad and was swatted. So it looks like Lebanon's going to go next. I've talked about this in previous clips about how I thought something was definitely coming and soon when I saw Trump do the anti-BDS thing. Then I saw Boris do it. And then you see the EU come from the other direction and try to instigate some investigations of Israel from the other direction. And now we see Soleimani getting popped. And of course, the whole machine has ginned up where it's all like anti-BDS Israel, anti-BDS Israel, because they're about to go after Lebanon. And that means they're going to deal with Hezbollah there. And that's why you have Carlos Ghosn there at the moment. It's not about Iraq. It's about Lebanon first. Then Iraq will simply fall into place. They're going to roll them up back towards that area. And to Tim's point, there is still the possibility of doing all kinds of activation of Kurdish groups. You can say that the Kurdish groups are on good terms with, the ones that are associated with Iran are on good terms with Iran. But wait until shit really gets worse in Iran. And trucks full of $100 bills, like trucks, creaking, groaning trucks of $100 bills are driven up to people and like dropped off in their front yard, literally. You might find that the Kurds and all the other ethnic groups, it's like people don't know about Bakhtiaris, they don't know about the Turkish-speaking populations in Iran. Everyone's like, oh, the Iranians, they're so together with Soleimani, they're just knit together so tightly and closely in support of him. Look at a fucking Iranian map, man. There are many competing ethnic groups, and there are sectarian divisions. So, anyway, I have probably talked about this in general terms for long enough. I think the time has come for me to take a look at these questions. So, do me a favor here, and you have to highlight me so I see it, because otherwise I'm a boomer and the shit will slide by. I'm not so bad as to need reading glasses yet, but the text is small. Throw the questions my way and I will attempt to answer them. Jeffrey Grimm asks, Semi-Agog, what do you think of Iraq's vote to have the U.S. leave? Predictable? Yeah. I know Tim thinks that that we are unlikely to abandon that position and leave. I'm 50-50 on it because I think there's some way that Trump could turn it to his purposes. And to be fair, Tim did not entirely rule that out. He just made the point that there are things that have to be consolidated first. I love the idea, if there is a way of doing it, of leaving and allowing that entire explosion, that, heaving of a sheetrock bucket full of diarrhea into a power fan to take shape, because Iraq could become a total nightmare. And, yes, I mean, it already more or less is, but I'd like to see them come up with some way to pull out and say, okay, hold this, I'll give it to you. So next question from Noah Solomon. Semi-Agog, you mentioned propaganda aimed at the right. What make you of globalist propaganda framing events as national security briefings targeting Trump and his White House bubble? Is he informed? I'm not sure I understand this question. What make you of globalist propaganda framing events as national security briefings targeting Trump and his White House bubble? Perhaps you're aware of something I'm not. Has there been some flashy PR event where a bunch of national security advisors made a show of approaching him and saying that you're crazy or something? Sorry, man, I'd love to address it more capably, but I'm not sure I follow. Okay, now I'm trying to scroll upwards. All right. MCT says, I'm very interested in your Gosen or Gon theory. Can you expand? Yeah, look at the previous clip. There's one that just got posted called Iran and Lebanon. The theory isn't well developed, but basically he's like of the technocrat baronial class, and he's been groomed since his youth to be a captain of industry. And there has been talk over a period of years that you can see, scuttlebutt that appears in the press, including the Lebanese press, about how he might run for office there. And then out of the blue in November of 2018, a whole shitstorm comes down on him, and he's under house arrest, and he's pushed off the boards of all these multinational companies that are of incredible power. And now, right when all this shit is going down with Soleimani, and right when Lebanon will become a major focus of attention, he just happens to climb into an upright base case provided by musicians, supposedly part of some sort of paramilitary force, if according to some reports. And then he decides he's going to fly to Lebanon, to fucking Lebanon. So yeah, watch the previous clip, do some research of your own. I'd be interested to hear what you think. Okay. Marc-Andre Otis, Semi-Agog, will Trump do this war better than Bush? Man, I sure fucking hope so. My suspicion is that there will be some high-profile, high-tech American stuff to establish our capabilities, and then we're not screwing around anymore, just to show that, no, we're not afraid to have blood spatter a little bit. Hopefully it will be as little as possible. And I expect Trump to literally push these other parties to have to step forward and deal with it. Russia's there. They've shown that they're willing to commit men and treasure in support of, for example, the Syrian regime. Something's going to go down with Lebanon. I pointed out that Lebanon is now effectively surrounded with the U.S. in the east, Russia in the north, and Israel in the south. If we get some European Navy ships off the coast, the encirclement will be complete. So my short answer is I sure as fuck hope so, in terms of Trump doing the war better than Bush. And I expect he's probably going to try to push other people up to act as proxies and to take care of their responsibilities. Everybody carry their own weight, as it were. Okay. Illuminati Socrates, Semi-Agog, what are the chances of an attempt on Donald Trump's life? I think as high as they've ever been, and they'd have to be high. I know nothing about it, but you can be. I would guess that Trump's private and government-provided security are going full speed. Okay, Semi-Agog, this is from Baggins Omigtao. Semi-Agog, who is China going to back more, Sunni or Shiite? Are they into regime change? Do they get into that argument? Sure, they're into regime change, just like everybody else, including us. I don't think you can say that they're going to back Sunni and Shiite more. It's who's available and who they have to pander to. In this case, they've invested heavily in Iran and in extending existing Iranian influence networks. But I mean, China could easily come in, for example. China could be responsible for regime change in Iran. That could be like a requirement of Trump to finally reach some deal with them and Russia in order to get all the pieces on the board. Fine. You know what? You own Iran. You change it. But I tend to think that Russia, is going to have more to do with setting things down in Iran, or in terms of having levers of influence on the regime, because there are two likely candidates for controlling Central Asian, economies and influence through the stands. And those two possible players are Turkey or Iran. And Russia's got too much interest in it, I think, to let China do it. So China basically, in this part of the world, as it becomes the global commons and China has to basically just take what they're given, China ain't got to like it, or increasingly won't have the luxury of saying whether they like it or not. Patrick Doiron says, Semiagog, what did you think of Trump threat to target Iranian heritage sites? I think that was designed to make them do something stupid. Tim pointed it out. I think he's 100% on. He said, Oliver, you have to, and it's in the last clip, you have to bear in mind that this guy just got taken out, but he's not the only one. We've seen lots of other militia leaders getting assassinated, and some of them getting rounded up, probably depending on who they were working for and whether or not they had an escape lever to some extent. You hear about the white helmets guy having a terrible accident, falling off a rooftop in Istanbul. You hear about al-Baghdadi being killed. Like, these people are being knocked out. And that means, as Tim tried to get across to me, that you've got minds of the second or probably third and fourth water, runners up in the attempt to gain distinction in the great game. And they're now going to be in charge of making decisions for Iran. So when Trump does something like, well, we could hit heritage sites too, one of the things that will immediately come to mind for a Shiite is holy sites. And many of those holy sites are in Iraq. Some are in Iran, some are in Iraq. What's going to happen if they start to think to themselves, oh my God, Trump might hit the holy site of Karbala, the martyrdom of Hassan and Hussein. Oh my God, it's going to be horrible. We've all got to act. Like, I think it was designed to push them over the edge and get them to do something stupid. And as Tim pointed out, they're primed precisely for that, because their best thinker just got turned into a red mist. Okay, Paul Mansky says, Iran will attack U.S. bases in Kuwait, sink a battleship, and some U.S. North American targets. Will Trump respond with tactical nuclear weapons? Well, I guess one or the other of those things, if Iran were spectacularly successful, could happen. But I tend to think that Iran's going to be playing hell, hitting targets like, attacking a base successfully. Sinking a battleship. I don't even know if we have battleships, but if you mean like a destroyer or something, good luck. I think Trump will respond, but I don't think he needs to do so with tactical nuclear weapons. Because what's happening, you got to remember, is that Iran is now being ramped towards starting their program. They're like, the shackles are off. They're going to wave it as some sort of terrifying threat that we're all supposed to be scared of. It's the head of the boogeyman. Iran will soon start, enriching uranium again and pursuing its nuclear program. They're doing exactly what Trump wants. If they do conventional weapons attacks that are notable in any way, and at the same time are working on their nuclear program, they have just basically put everything on the table Trump needs, and all these other countries that might be against Iran's interests, to make the case for why they need to be stopped. So, in answer to your question about Trump using tactical nukes, no, because everything's about to fall in place perfectly for him. Now, he may smack the shit out of them, but it will be with conventional weapons, I believe. Okay, I'm looking for things that have a big red flashing Semiagog indicated on them, because I don't catch all of the... I see Tim Root is still saying, I am Tim. Mr. Tim, welcome. Okay, what other questions do we have here, ladies and gentlemen? Surely there are a bunch of people who think I'm an asshole or a Zionist shill or that Trump is doing this all for Israel. The people who disagree with me, please speak up. Tell me. Whatever it is that that you guys think I am crazy or wrong about, or want to know more about, shoot me a message and I will reply. Or if I have successfully put everyone to sleep, you guys can just let me know that, thank you, that's plenty. But I am able to continue until midnight if there are questions and interest from the stream. All right, I have one from Deity Smirk. What do you think of Iraq kicking us out and Trump saying they need to pay us back first? I love it. I think it's great. I would like nothing better than to get out of there. And Trump's thing of paying us back first works out nicely. Basically, he's just got to keep a small force there in order to ensure that the repayment is made, because they wouldn't want to have to go back in. It'll be such a mess. But go ahead and pay up, and then we're out. All right, Baggins of MGTOW says, Semigog, where does Pakistan fit into this? I think we're going to have to wait and see. Pakistan is obviously a major sort of spur off of China's One Belt, One Road. But there is a whole lot going on with India right now in terms of dealing with Muslim populations there, and Modi trying to consolidate control and maybe pressing some buttons to get people to respond stupidly. That whole side of it, Pakistan will fit in, but I am not prepared at this point to discuss it further, other than you can go back through some of the clips where we talk about Pakistan a little bit. But I'm only just now catching up on this Levantine situation and Libya. Pakistan, I have not yet looked at closely. It will be part of the One Belt, One Road thing, but developments in India are doubtless going to affect it. Okay. Oh, wow, now there are a bunch of questions. Mark Andre Otis, can USA do an effective propaganda against Islamists? Sure. The best way to deal with them is to roll them up or send them elsewhere. I mean, that's one of the big things that's happening. You see, it's not just that Islamists are going to have to be put out of business. It's that a deal is going to get made that will require, for China's interests, for them to cross Afghanistan and possibly get active in other places like Pakistan. And right around that time, all of the nasty Islamists will be shipped into zones where they can cause trouble for China. Okay. Semigog, what of Syria? I don't know. I tend to think that a pipeline will go through the north, just south of Turkey's border, but that maybe what they'll do is it'll go south, but then it will have to punch through with tunnels through the Sanjak of Alexandretta. So maybe Turkey cuts a deal to where they've got North Cyprus and they've got a port in the Sanjak of Alexandretta, but that pipeline runs through Syria as well, which allows Syria to get a piece of it, and it allows Russia with its military base there to maintain the ability to cut it off. So basically what you've done is you've given, to get their buy-in, you've given Turkey the ability to cut it off, and you've given Russia and Syria the ability to cut it off. And then they'll say, okay, you can run it here, but we get our cut. How do the tariffs affect this? That's from Bob Adler. I think that's relative to China and trade negotiations between the US and China. And this that we're seeing right here is the non-kinetic climax, at least thus far, except for people like Soleimani getting popped. This is the non-kinetic climactic moment of those trade negotiations. This is China trying to force its way in. And if things hold with Russia, and if the EU can get knocked back up a step and cause to barf up its commie and immigrant problem, then it's all about to be settled soon. And the one way China's going to get it is going to be the way it gets offered to them. Okay, Semigog, Devil's Advocate. This is from Prism. What if Team Trump is a super black pill faction that sees demographic catastrophe in the US and wants to set up a new capital somewhere like Israel? I had never entertained such a thing, just simply because whoever the players are, I don't see them ceding US territory willingly. I'll give that some thought. Okay, adherent of Lady Columbia, Semigog, what I see to come after China's fall will be the focus for the US shift to South America to secure our hemisphere, or to Africa to secure certain rare resources or space. Well, rare earth mineral production has begun in the United States again, and they've got this whole new way that they do it that's so much cleaner. Billions have been invested in order to make the process clean. Isn't that exciting? In terms of South America, our attention is already there, but we're kind of staying back. China is, I think, playing this game with Iran first, because they know the Navy can interdict anything they might want to do with energy coming from Venezuela. And their whole second Panama Canal thing in Nicaragua has been shut down, apparently. I think what's most likely to happen, and maybe Trump and the rest are banking on this, is that once the problem starts in Lebanon, then Iran and the Chinese will cause problems on our southern border. But what they don't realize is that will provide a pretext. We'll finally be able to move in, build the wall, and slap the shit out of the narcos. So, I don't know. Dark Helmet, Semi-Agog, would Trump actually hit the 52 positions he threatened to hit? Well, I don't know that he's named any, but in the sense that, like, would he do an attack where, on the news shows, they can show 52 little red dots where they hit? Or hit one place 52 times, which I wouldn't rule out. Yeah, I believe he'd do it. Sure. But I haven't followed it closely to see where his, what he might be headed towards. Johnsky says, Semigog, did you hear about the reports from Iraqis of hundreds of American planes parading up and down the border next to Iran? No, I hadn't, but it wouldn't surprise me. All right. Fooey, I've been kicked back again by an auto refresh. All right. Good God, there are a ton of questions. All right. Wow. Well, I've got my questions, I guess. All right. So there's John Skis, Nana Vega, who provided all kinds of interesting insights about what's going on in the ground, on the ground in European Cyprus. She asks, Semigog, who will be allied with Brazil, China or U.S.? We tariff their steel. They just signed a development contract with China. Yeah, they'll be happy to sign a development contract with China, and they're going to be doing their own thing. But I think they will be aligned with the U.S. Remember, Trump is a businessman. He's not trying to punish China, except insofar and only insofar as it's necessary to close the deal. He's going to let everybody buy from everybody, and half of this is all about hashing out spheres of influence. Okay. Somebody who didn't put my name, but I noticed this, said, when did you decide to get on YouTube and be an analyst? Have you done something like this in the past? Seems like you came out of nowhere. That from Horatius 763. I've been doing this with Tim for 3 years. So, I mean, I guess that's kind of out of nowhere, but not really. King Salmon Fish. Semigog, isn't energy independence nice? Also best economy and military of all time. Yes, I have a red hat around here somewhere. Okay. Commissar Helena Lydia, what do you think about Saudi Arabia in relations to the Iran shit show? They want it to happen, but I don't think they realize that once Iran gets sorted out, they become that much less important. I think they're going to be peeled off to be like, instead of thinking of that part of the Middle East as really being the Middle East, I think they're going to have an Eastern Mediterranean. We're going to start to think about what we call the Middle East as the Eastern Mediterranean, which is going to be thought of as part of the European domain, especially with things like French-speaking Christian Lebanese people returning to Lebanon. I think by contrast, Saudi Arabia is now going to be much more part of Africa, which fits perfectly because I think of Arabs more as Africans. And so Saudi Arabia, I think their position, they'll remain viable to a certain extent, but I think they're going to see their importance taken down several notches, and they're basically going to have to hump China's leg instead of ours. Okay, did Iran really offer an $80 million bounty on Trump? I wouldn't doubt it. Team GB, Semigog, Trump, Israel wants sunny dominance in the region. No. No, I don't think so. They've got to deal with the Shiites who are there. I think that they want it fragmented enough that these various forces can sort of, what's the term? Immobilize, render. Some kind of equilibrium is reached based on the competing factions all being roughly the same strength. And then, as I said, having it be in China and Europe's interests to maintain some sort of détente, status quo there. Okay, anonymous user, Semigog is someone who studied physics at a top 5 university. I can peg the cost of solar power from space at around 0.02 kilowatt hours, which beats oil above. This kills the whole energy thesis. Solar power from space? Do you mean just solar power, like solar panels? So you're talking about, I mean, is there solar power that doesn't come from space? My first question is English your first language? My second question would be, what's your first language? I'll be happy to answer that if you can provide more details, but right now, I don't want to accuse you, but it sounds like a shill comment. Okay. Juicy Jumbler, Semigog, some very accurate, high IQ political analysts are convinced Trump will lose election due to lack of accomplishments, losing white middle class and immigration. They make convincing case. My response to that is you ain't seen nothing yet. Take a look at the channel Conservative Citizen. They pull radio episodes off, they record radio episodes and put them online. And there is one from about a week ago that I only caught up in the last couple of days, and it is an interview with Joe DeGenova. So go listen to that one, and you will see that now it's official. It's not Mike Flynn. Who's the other guy who's in charge of the NSA? Somebody say it in the chat. Anyway, he is now cooperating with the Durham investigation, which means they've got this as a conspiracy. And they specifically use the term conspiracy charges. And for those who know anything about the law, I don't know much, but Tim explained this to me. It allows them to go back in time beyond the statute of limitations because it's an ongoing conspiracy. And if any aspect of that conspiracy took place within the recent statute of limitations, then you can grab the whole chain of it and yank it up across time, going back quite some distance. And this business, I think it's Mike Rogers. Anyway, the fact that he is cooperating with Durham means that they've got this going back at least as far as the original unmasking before even the election. So when you think about what's going to get sorted out with China, the fact that some people really are going to go to jail, there are some other surprises that are coming before the end of the year. I expect that because Trump is a specialist in shit like he cut his teeth on reality TV. This is the fourth season finale, and we are moving towards it. Okay, what else do we have here? Cody David, your video is about 5 seconds slower than your audio. I'm sorry to hear that. Hopefully it's not like that for everyone, but sometimes it happens with a delay. I barely got this thing to go live at all, so dealing with latency and delay is beyond me. I'm going to have to talk to someone who knows more about it. But I apologize to all of you, my viewers. I appreciate your patience with my boomerishness. Jared Roberts, Semigog, why doesn't Turkey just run the pipeline through its territory bypassing Syria? Well, because then Russia would lose that aspect of control. And Russia is working out a number of things now with Turkey, apparently, having to do with energy and pipelines. See, the whole thing is that Russia needs to be able to deal with it, to have a veto, right? If it goes through Syria, then Russia and the Syrians physically can drive their trucks up and turn it off or cut it in half or blow it up, right? If Turkey has the last little part of the pipeline going through the projecting southward Sanjak of Alexandretta, then they too have that power. So it's the ability to basically say, look, we don't have to trust each other. We both have our hands on this and can throttle it if we have to. So let's all make money. Plus, the running it through Turkey would cost lots and lots and lots and lots more, because if you look at a topographical map from space, or the terrain from space with the satellite imagery, you will see that right at the point where the Turkish border appears in the northern part of Syria is where it just becomes rough country. Okay, so what else do we have? Big Rock, Semigog, random question, but what are your thoughts on Azov Battalion? Don't know nothing about them. Hard right, Ukrainian, probably have all kinds of intelligence services in there. I expect they're probably being used as much for the right as for the left, because if you can get them to do something bad, it becomes a new anchor for snowballing some new PR exercise. But I don't know anything about them, really. Okay, what else do we have here? Zed Des promoted Semigog. A take not shared in our circles often enough. Oh, that's something about saying something about me. Zed Des, thank you. Zed Des very kindly set me up to be able to talk on JF's channel, which I've enjoyed very much. JF's a very interesting guy. Okay, Illuminati, Socrates, space-based solar power. I imagine you still got to have some way to transmit that power from space if you're going to have it up there. And we're not quite there yet. And all of that just leaves aside the whole thing of all the existing power structures that have control of our energy systems. They're just going to be like, well, we can get it from space and it's cheaper, so let's stop, even though we have the entire world knit up and we're making money on everything that goes one way or the other. They're not just going to be like, let's do it from space. Sure. No. Now, happen eventually. And that's probably part of why this space program is being developed. But, that is not happening tomorrow. Semigog, what happens with U.S. petrodollar once Saudis lose their oil dominance? I don't know. And in order to tackle that, I would have to know more about how currency works and the petrodollar itself. And I would have had to have been doing my homework about Bitcoin, or and comparable cryptocurrencies. And even more importantly, things like smart contracts that are going to do things like wipe out whole fucking public sectors, whole economic sectors, job sectors, and a lot of them white collar, like whole crap cans of lawyers and clerks. With the emergence of smart contracts, are going to go the way of the fucking dodo, and it's going to happen like in a week. It's going to be like that, and they're out of fucking work. Because once this stuff is tested, the implementation of it, imagine the guys going into boardrooms, at some major company, and they're going to be like, well, we're going to put this stuff in with smart contracts, and that means you're going to need to dump basically 60% of your paralegal and lawyer, workforce, because all of this stuff is going to happen like in 0.5 of a second. Anyway, okay, Semigog. I think he's talking about solar power from orbital collectors. It's a beautiful idea. Get back to me when you're further along with it. And I mean that without being dismissive. There's no way the people who control all these energy networks and have carefully built them with all their blood and treasure over centuries are just gonna be like, well, yeah, it costs 1/100th the amount in order to be able to put something up into space. Okay. Anonymous user, Semigog, space-based solar power equals panels deployed to space and power beamed down. The space program was shut down 50 years ago, but because it upends the energy market and removes Middle East meddling pretext. I would agree, it probably did happen, but it's not just, remember, it's not just the ME meddling pretext. Now we've got the energy coming out of Russia and the US. There are a whole lot of things to do to unite all under heaven before we have to move to space. And I think that the people who really do think long-term are not going to be, they don't want to see something happen in space until things get locked down on Earth. Now, at the end of the day, I don't believe they're going to be able to effectively block this stuff, really, but, they can try. Okay, I'm going to skip space questions. Inanna Vegas says, Semigog, Iran and Turkey just signed a religious accord to share scholarship. Unprecedented Sunni Shia detente. What is their plan? What will Russia do? Well, if you see Iran and Turkey start to cooperate, maybe it could be that they're both going to say that we have a role in shaping what goes on in the stands, and thereby the Iranian half would be allied with Russia, and maybe the Turkey half would be NATO. I don't know. I haven't looked at it. If it's simply sharing scholarship on religious stuff, I mean, that's just sort of a headline. It's a cuteness, because you got to understand how screwed up a lot of their textual traditions in general. I don't know how things have changed, but when I lived in Turkey, you'd go to a bookstore and you just can't find books because you don't understand how different other people's academic traditions are until you go to a country and you find out you can't locate books because they don't bother to organize them. Like, they just don't. And you look in their historical books and they only figured out what a table of contents was, 60, 70 years ago. So anyway, what's next? El Vaquero is in the house. Hello, sir. He writes, well, Ali, I killed another elk, more meaty goodness in the freezer. May go Barbary sheep hunting this weekend. You're having a better time than I am, man. I'm going to have to get around to that. I'm going to have to get around to doing some hunting. Oh, it looks like Zedez just removed someone ugly. I'm so happy that Zedez is making the magic happen. Okay, I'm looking for other questions. We now have roughly 24 minutes left. So just to keep this together, maybe try to ask me questions that are related to this overall picture vis-a-vis the Middle East and what's going on in the rest. But that said, if you've got something really good you just want to ask separate, we got 24 minutes left, so lay it on. Ladies and gentlemen, questions, please. I'd also be interested to see what people are actually here, because so few of them comment. Just wait for me to make an ass of myself and steal ideas. All right, what do we have, peoples? If you want me to answer it, you're going to have to stick a semiagog in the text so that I see it. And if I don't, I will assume that the time is coming to wrap up the stream. Space is prohibited until there is a lockdown on Earth, writes an anonymous user. I think that is probably the case. Mark Andre Otis, Semigod, can Gospels of Jesus put peace on the Middle East? I don't know. I was talking with Tim about that a little bit, asking him questions about Christianity and its future prospects. He seems to like the idea of a muscular Jesus. So maybe if a muscular Jesus narrative can be introduced. John Carr, Semigod, how's your magical path coming along? Magical spelled with a K. I wouldn't call it exactly that. Let's call it methodical and intentional self-discovery and development. It's coming along quite well, sir. I'm not dead yet. Okay. Wes Lund, Semigod, did you stop smoking? I hope so. Sadly, I am still at a few a day. I'm still at a few a day. Team GB, Semigod, is Trump defending Saudi Arabia from Iran? Yeah, I imagine so. But it's not just Iran. See, that's what everybody doesn't understand. You have to look at a map and you have to think about the fact, what I talked about at the beginning. China is a huge energy consumer and has no energy of their own. So now you have motivation for why they have to go abroad. They're a land power and they want to be a sea power too, because they don't feel confident enough about being just a land power, because Russia will try to cut them off because they're in a life and death struggle. And they don't feel comfortable enough just being a sea power because the United States has such a powerful Navy. And the supply chains would be so long. So what they have to do is to ensure their access to energy. So what's the one way that Saudi Arabia is going to be able to get energy out? It goes out by ship, unless they get a pipeline to the Mediterranean. But, towards Chinese regions, they're going to have to go out by sea. And so you get the Horn of Africa and you get Djibouti, where there's a Chinese base, just like there's a US base. And everyone's like, oh, the Houthis they're just being, forced to do this stuff by Iran. And they're Somali pirates. And, it's just a bunch of Shiites. I'm like, motherfuckers, that creates pressure that China can bring to bear on Saudi Arabia. China is trying to play the game with Iran right now. Saudi Arabia and Israel are trying to take Iran out of the game. China is trying to put pressure on Saudi Arabia so it has a harder time bringing its stuff out by ship, which is why they put a military base in Djibouti. And if you look just across from the little tip of Djibouti, what do you see? It's Yemen. Who's funding that? Iran/China. So that it becomes a less desirable place to port to ship your energy out of, because you got Somali pirates and all kinds of upheaval and you can't really be safe in the region. That means insurance rates are higher. It costs more per gallon by the time it arrives wherever it is it arrives. But Trump did them one better, played that routine on them with the Straits of Hormuz as well. So now Iran's getting screwed. But you have to see that it is it's a bigger game. This isn't like, oh, the Israelis are making Trump do this because it's about the Jews. Yes, the Jews are a part of the picture. Yes, Israel is one of the players. Yes, they manipulate circumstances to their benefit. But you have to look at a bigger map. There are more pieces on the board. Sorry, and that wasn't my frustration is not expressed towards the person who actually put the question. I'm just like, think. Okay, now I got to catch up with where the last questions are. Adherent of Lady Columbia, Semigod, what would the commies' next plan be once the One Belt, One Road is cut off? I don't think they're going to cut it off. They're going to force it to go to areas, and as Tim has put forth, they're going to basically allow China to build up infrastructure and then see them get pushed out once they're no longer popular. So, we can spend the next 50 years allowing China to be one who carries the weight of developing some of these areas of Central Asia. And they can, blow off their energy the way that we've been blowing it off. If you don't think that it can be effective to get a nation fucking about around the world, wasting its energy and its time and spending enormous amounts of money in order to have influence globally. Look at what happened to the United States. We've been the world's policeman, and yet we don't want to do anything bad. We've been like a Seattle cop. We've been like a London cop. Everyone's like, US is the world's policeman, but we've mainly been like a London cop. We just come up and we go, stop that. Stop that right now. The way that our military would work if we really were the world's policeman, we would go in and kick ass and take names. We would plow them up. We would salt the fucking fields, and we would crush their skulls to make fertilizer, and there would be nothing left. But no, we bought the idea of global policemen in one global diverse village, and it's a beautiful thing. And as a consequence, we've been spending huge amounts of money to be everywhere and threaten this and threaten that without actually being able to do it directly like we ought to be able to do. So I don't think they're going to cut off one belt, one road. They're just going to force it to flow in directions where, for example, the Russians, where they're concerned, will have sort of their own veto built in. The US as well, other players. India is going to be increasingly important. John Carr says magic with a K is a simple way to differentiate between a card trick and the craft. Yes, I read Crowley. I'm aware of when and where the K was introduced and why. Okay, John Ski, Semigog, will China intervene in this Iran problem, seeing as they get 90% of their oil through the Straits of Hormuz? Well, what's going to be interesting is when the U.S., if they decide, for example, to blockade the Straits of Hormuz fully, rather than just rely on the fact that it's more dangerous to dissuade people who are looking at balance sheets from going there, it will affect China. And then they're going to have to buy their oil from Russia and the U.S., as they're already doing, and their natural gas. We'll see what China does. I'm not sure what they'll do. There's some other things going on. I want to see what happens with Lebanon, and I want to see what happens with our Mexican border. Okay. Baggins Omigtao, Semigok, Somalia next after Lebanon. God, I hope someone cleans up that Italian mess. Somalia. Well, you know what? Hopefully we're going to be in a position where a bunch of Western trained and educated Somalis with more money are going to experience a very strong incentive to return and make a paradise of their homeland. Okay. Westland, Semigog, you're needed in this war. Please preserve yourself and take good care of yourself. Well, thank you. I'll keep my cigarette dosage low. Horatius, Semigog, have you ever watched the movie The Network? It's the scene at the huge table where the guy explains the huge macro picture ring true to you. That's the one with Faye Dunaway and I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore, right? I haven't watched that in a while. So the specific scene you're talking about doesn't come to mind. I'll have to take a look. Oh, okay. All right. I have to make an announcement for Mr. Tim Rudisil, my dear friend. There is a video that I'm editing right now that is sort of about American isolationism and getting engaged abroad. And in it, he discusses a foam that he wishes to promote. There is also some mention of it in our last clip, but I did not remember to do a full exposition of the idea in that clip. So mea maxima culpa. I'm sorry, Tim. I know he wants everyone to know about it. So I'm going to discuss it right here. You can go to Tim's Facebook page. I imagine I don't do anything on Facebook, but for those of you who are on Facebook, go to Tim's Facebook page, and there's something called, now it just scrolled down. God damn it. It's called Elephant Toothpaste or something. And Tim has some links to it. And I will try to remember to put a link in the comments below this once the live stream is done. Basically, these people have done this experiment, and they can mix a few basic, easy chemicals that aren't really toxic, and they will literally explode into foam, like some of that shit with like Mentos and Coca-Cola that you've seen, but like way more so. Literally, foam explodes in every direction. And Tim very much likes the idea of that as a non-lethal way of dealing with crowds. You basically put together foam cannons and foam bombs, and they explode into mountains of foam. And they don't drown anyone. They're just slippery and pink. So they leave you colored for easy identification. You can't really walk. You slip and fall on your butt. You try to pick up weapons, and they slip and slide in your hands. And you make them look ridiculous. Can you imagine? And this is Tim's idea, I grant. But whole massive waves of people heading towards the American embassy in Baghdad, and suddenly pink and light blue foam and all these rainbow colors explode everywhere, and they're like slobbing around in massive mountains of foam that's all brightly colored. And you can make it smell like anything. I said that it could smell like pork, but Tim's like, no, you don't want to antagonize them too much. The whole point is to make it non-lethal, make them look ridiculous, but not inflame tensions further. At which point he suggested that it smelled like shit. So giant explosions of pink and blue and yellow and candy clown colors of foam that all smell like feces and make everything slippery, and they're like wading around waist deep in pink foam. That is what Tim wanted to share with the world. It will be mentioned in the next clip coming. I will provide links, and I've done my best to make right this failure in my duty. I hope that Tim will forgive me. And now I don't even know where I am in this whole business. Okay, I think I'm further down. There we go. One Belt Road. Okay, I'm catching up. Okay, I'm getting there. That was about Somalia. All right, getting there. Anon Leibovitz asks, Semiagog, does America have moral justification for intervention anymore? Many countries have seen through the democratization argument, and the U.S. public doesn't support intervention generally. Yes, I think that's what's coming up, and I think Trump is going to have to prove it. I think he surprised a lot of people with whatever it was that he worked out in Syria, because it was supposed to be like the neocons were running around with like a 90-year-old man with a horse-shaped cock suffering from priapism. They were like, the time has come, we're going to have more war in Syria. And somehow Trump just turned around, cut a deal with Turkey and the Russians, and it didn't happen. And yet now Turkey and the Russians are the one who are going to have to deal with policing it. Meanwhile, Turkey is getting sent over to Libya, which is another one of these areas that needs to be dealt with. Not the U.S. The U.S. is pretending they don't care, even though Haftar is their baby. Again, we're seeing a situation where someone else is going to come in and carry the weight. I think what Trump is going to do with this Iran thing as well, Tim differs from me. I think Israel will get more actively involved. Tim seems to think they won't have to. But we'll see. In any case, I think the major point remains the same, which is that Trump is going to have to make a case over this coming year for how what he's doing is allowing us to leave. And that's why I said at the beginning of this, why not just take a moment and imagine, if you will, just for a second, that you might have to crack a few eggs before you back out and leave. That's all. Everyone's like, he killed Soleimani. Oh my God, there's going to be a new draft. It's terrible. It's all the Yinon plan, the Jews. Like, you are going to have to stabilize that situation before you withdraw from it. And I think that that is what Trump is going to find a way to show. I hope so. Because he needs to, because I agree that there is a huge proportion of the American population, including me, that doesn't want to be in any more of these goddamn wars. So I think what's going to happen is that you're going to see Anon Leibovitz. I think you're going to see a situation where the U.S. backs out and China gets to play the villain. You know, it's not just that, oh, there's going to be no more American intervention. It's going to be, in certain specific areas, there will be no more intervention, and everyone will get to see that it kind of sucks to be dealing with the Chinese. And then after a time, they'll be like, God, I wish you white people would come back, because this whole business of being dealt with by the Chinese is not exactly what we wanted. Anyway, that's all speculation. What percentage of Iran is Zoroastrian? I don't know, but the figures that from Bodacious, the figures are small. Okay, El Vaquero, there are more pieces on the board. Exactly. Keep your eye on the Jews who are dirty, and you're going to get a knife in the back from the non-Jews who are dirty. That's one way of looking at it. Jimmy Parker's comment that I accidentally read. Okay. Salt the Earth, Third Punic War. Yes, El Vaquero, that is what I had in mind. Horatius 763, Semiagog, have you ever watched that? Network? Okay, I've caught back up with where I was. Zachary Rose asks, wasn't Trump impeached some time ago? Except not refreshed, and I can't find that anymore. Oh God, I'm lost, people. Yes, not too long ago, or did I dream that? The House voted to impeach him, but did not pass that on to the Senate. So it's just sitting there, and it suits Trump to let it sit there. It currently suits Pelosi to let it sit there because she can pretend to just kind of keep feeding it and, you know, introducing new articles. And it's all just it's basically just it's a drag. It's barnacles on the hull of Trump's ship that have been placed there to, you know, make sure he doesn't cut the water as cleanly in the run up to the election. Okay, binary epidemic. Says Semikok, what do you think of the Wolves of Vinland, a pagan revivalist movement in Virginia and Idaho? I've never heard of them. No idea. A bacon from a bomb. Nice. That from Martin Webb. The bacon bomb. Okay. Cloud cannons. Stinky psychological pink. Oh, wow. Yeah, I was way behind. All right. So I'm heading down here. We have a little more than 8 minutes left. 500,000 Zoroastrians is what Wes Lund had to say about how many Zoroastrians. Thank you for that figure. Zeddes says, thanks to Semigog. Zeddes, thank you very much. What else do we have here? It looks like we're getting close to wrapping up. Martin Webb says he's an anarchist. Man, I used to like anarchists until I saw what some of the people who claim to be anarchists are doing, and I'm like, don't fucking associate me with that shit. They've like stolen the whole meme of anarchism and made it laughable. Freedom Foam, right? John Ski should be working for a branding agency. All right, we got 7 minutes left. We can joke around and fuck about before I shut down here at midnight. Thank you all, by the way, for checking this out. Again, sorry for the stupidity at the beginning of this thing. I was just, I could not figure out how to make this work. Elvacaro says, isn't there a hive of Zoroastrians in Michigan? Hell if I know. But I mean, there's a hive of, there's a small community of Circassians in New Jersey, so anything's possible. Mark Andreotis says, you don't need a bacon bomb. Every explosive already contains pork. Who knew? Water Penny says, a poem. I don't have a poem this time. Maybe I can pull something, though. Maybe a quote. Oh, I'll just pull that quote from La Rochefoucauld that I like, if I can remember it. I will make it a cynical observation. Oh no, I can do a poem because I have one that is a cynical observation and a poem. Moment. Let me see if I can find the shit. Oh, Grandpa Boomer is so slow. Poems, select poems. Who the hell is it? No, I need to be in there. Poetry. Yes, you will get a goodbye poetry. Let's see here. Maybe in here? All right, I'm going to look and see if there are a few more comments while this is opening up. What else do we have here? Faith Alexandria Oglesby in the house. Jimmy Parker in the house. Hello, peoples. Bunch of folks I know. All right, yes, this is it. Where's my poem? Oh, Microsoft Word sucks and is slow, people. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we're getting towards the closing here, so I'm slowing down as I try to make this computer work. I think my processor is already a little choked up as well. Okay. Dark Helmet, Semigog, did you see the U.S. troops taking a commercial plane to Iraq on Gung Ho Vid's channel? Funny seeing M4s everywhere on the plane. Well, I remember while the stuff was going on, I actually dated a chick who was a flight attendant on a private airline that basically just did business flying troops back and forth. So there's a lot of that going on. A whole lot of that going on. Okay. Oh, wouldn't you know it? I try to do this and Microsoft Word crashes because, you know, that's what Microsoft Word does. So you're going to get a poem, ladies and gentlemen. It's just going to take a moment. Hopefully this time it won't choke. Okay. God, I hope I didn't piss Tim too much off about his phone. I hope everyone will go and look at the foam. You know what? I hope everyone will get together and post shit about the foam on Twitter and about how the U.S. should be using it as a non-lethal anti-personnel thing, so then Tim won't be angry at me. Oh, it's going to suck if he's all pissed off at me now. Okay. So find. There we go. I'm going to find that poem. Yes, there we go. Almost there, ladies and gentlemen. Patience. My apologies. Almost there. There we go. No, that's the wrong one. Nope, not that one. Yes. I have a closing poem. So let me take a look here at the last questions and remarks from you wonderful people who have so patiently stuck with me through this crazy process. We are approaching the end of the stream. It is only 3 minutes away. Scott asks, Synagogue, what did you think of Keith's take? I saw that on JFG's thing. I want to think wonderful thoughts about Keith because he cut his teeth in his early days on Max Stirner, as I did. But to be honest with you, I think he would have difficulty in this respect in terms of the geopolitics of it and everything else. I think he has his head up his own ass and has no idea what's going on. JF, on the other hand, is very much like open-minded about things and prepared to look at it from different directions. I think he was generally sort of keeping an open mind and trying to listen to everyone. I don't want to say anything bad about Keith otherwise. I just think, you know, he's a leftist and doesn't want a war. I mean, he apparently has all the same sort of things that were a part of his outlook, to whatever extent I understand it. All those attitudes are still there, and he's got little Iranian flags in his Twitter profile, and he's, you know, don't attack, and it's all because of the Jews. It's just, there are pieces of it that you could say, yeah, map to reality, but the context isn't there in space or in time, and so I was sort of disappointed in it. JF, I like. Keith's take I found entirely uninspiring and unimpressive and inaccurate. That's not to say he isn't smart. He's got more followers than I do. He's much more of an internet sensation than I. And there are many things he's apparently for that I'm for too. So I don't want to talk shit about him. I didn't find it useful or whatever. Okay. All right, we're just 2 minutes away. I'm going to see if there are any good last questions here. Synthesized Music is in the house. Hello. By the way, Prism is in the house. I just want to say hello specifically. Water Penny, of course. Guy from V. All these folks are rolling. All right, it looks like we're getting to the end. The Binary Epidemic says, Synagogue, would you rather live in Oregon, Colorado, Michigan, or Northeast rural U.S.? Oregon is gorgeous, so I would consider that, especially if you could just move all the people who live there out, the crazy ones anyway. Well, Colorado would be second. Rural Northeast U.S., if you're talking about like Maine or Vermont or something, I could do, but I'm from the South, man. Horatius, that's what's your definition of right and left at this point. I'd say, I'm not even going there. I've got literally 1 minute left. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to be closing with a poem. Before I do so, I want to ask you, please go over to Millennial Woe's channel and check out my interview and discussion with him. It was a great talk. I enjoyed it a lot, and I want to promote Woe's channel. I also want to promote myself. So if you go over and check out my discussion with Woe's, please also get the link, which I'll try to remember to stick in the comments below. Please do vote, because Woe's has put up a little vote option. And it would be great if you could head over there and vote for Synagogue, because I would like to perform well enough that he will invite me back for next year. And what else do we have? I guess that's it for now. Yeah, check me out over on Millennial Woes. Check out the previous clip I just did with Tim on Iran and Lebanon. A lot of this is covered, but you might want to back up one more to the one entitled The New Middle East, which covers a lot of this. What else? Yeah, I guess that's it for now. Yeah, there's going to be a clip tomorrow, which will have further discussion of Tim's foam, and it will be up probably tomorrow, the next day at the latest. Yeah, and thanks to everybody who supports the channel. Thanks to the mods. And before I say goodnight, oh, by the way, fucking Happy New Year, everyone. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. I had this image of like Father Time, you know, the previous year, shown as the old man, you know, all hunched with his little scythe and his wings and the hourglass, right? And he's a white guy. And I just had this vision of all these little babies, none of whom are white, a whole diverse rainbow of all these children for the new year. And I thought to myself, I wanted to say, Happy New Year to all of you. Happy New Year. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is it. I am going to read you this poem, and then I'm going to bid you all good night. The poem is entitled War. unleashed in times of change, a necessary concomitant of productive disintegration. Only the poor conspire. The rich simply make plans. Before the remaking, they blow flutes only dogs can hear. And when howling skies deliver the reply, bones, buildings, and bloodlines ride the shudder-shattering waves of progress.